I was working on my dad's ranch in 1970, and we worked 7 days a week. He had about in 10,000 acres in Leon and Freestone County, and we just never did get off. And I thought I'm gonna get into something else. And I had uh, friends that lived in Buffalo, Texas, and we lived in Oakwood, and uh, they were both in mortuary school, and just talked me into going down there. And I got interested in it and went to mortuary school and worked in Houston for all the time I was in school. I worked nights at the funeral home there, and then after I got out of school, had another job in Jacksonville, but didn't really like it, and I ended up here in 1971 or two, and I've been here ever since. Now we
Okay.
service some blacks here.
Okay. Is it different? Because that was one of
No,
our sections.
really and truly, uh, blacks that use us are more respectful of your place, your building, and even on a service, they'll come dressed up just like they're going to church. And white people, some of them will come in flip flops, tennis shoes. It doesn't make any difference. So, really and truly, they're easier to handle. Now, they hold them out longer, but on white funerals, usually 3 to 4 days, we picked them up, prepared them, had a visitation, a service, and gone to the cemetery. But on blacks, they're gonna hold them in this area most of the time until Saturday. So if they die on this Saturday, we may not bury him until next Saturday. This man here's we've had him 9 days, and we're gonna bury him tomorrow. But they like to bury on Saturday. I don't know whether it's because of just a custom or they know people are off work most of the time, Saturday and Sunday. So most of the blacks we bury on Saturday. Well, when we get a death call, we're going to get a death call either from the home if they died at home or from an institution like the hospital or the emergency room if it's a sudden death, or some of them are with hospice and they're in nursing homes or uh, some facility, and we pick them up. On a house call, we have to send uh, 2 people on a house call. At the nursing homes and the hospital and all, there's always staff there, so we just send one to pick them up. But we pick them up, and if the family's there, we visit with them then and find out when they're coming in to make arrangements. And we give them a list of all the things that we'll have to have because once they come in, we've got to get enough information to file the death certificate in the county that they died in, like here or over in Longview, Big Red County, different counties. But and then all that information we gather, that's what we use to write the obituary, to notify the public, and then part of that information is personal data that we send electronically to Austin and file that death certificate electronically. Talk to the family when they come in and ask them how many death certificates they need, explain to them what they need death certificates for, insurance, royalties, bank accounts that's in the deceased name alone, and usually they'll figure out how many they need, and we order. Usually, I tell them to order a couple of extra in case they forget something, and not have to come back. Because in the state of Texas, they charge you $21 for the first death certificate, and then $4 a piece for each additional death certificate. And just for an example, if somebody said we don't need but 2 death certificates, we pay them 21 and 4, which is $25. A month from now, if they come back in and say something else come up, every time we go back to the state to get more death certificates, they're going to charge you that $21 again. So I just tell them add up how many death certificates you know you need and add 2 or 3 extra ones in case something comes up. So most of the time we get it right. They don't have to reorder. Sometimes we do though. So, but
Okay.
and then if a family gives us information that's not right on a death certificate, for example, we had one last month and they gave us the wrong Social Security number. Well, we have to file an amendment then, and that original death certificate is always on file in Austin, but the amendment is attached to the bottom of it, making the corrections, and it is a nightmare getting that done. So families don't think that's really important when you're asking them social security numbers, dates of birth, where they were born, and all that goes on the death certificate. And if they're not really plugged into what we're asking them, sometimes they'll give us maybe the deceased spouse's social security number, and we don't know that till it's too late. So there's a lot of paperwork to it, and then once we type the obituary up, we let the family read it before they leave to be sure we've got all names spelled correctly, all dates right, and once they preview the obituary for the paper and they okay it, then we send it electronically to whichever papers they tell us. Some papers doesn't charge anything. Some charge, like our local paper, charges $30 for a picture and the obituary. That same obituary in the Longview paper will be like $200. So every newspaper is different. And if you get in the Dallas, Houston area, it's going to be even higher than that. So sometimes the family will want you to notify maybe a half a dozen papers, but once you get to getting prices on it, then they'll go to backing off and just use what they need to notify the public. And it's we post it online. We've got an online that people, for example, in out of state that can't come, they can get online, read the obituary, and sign a guest book, and then all those guest book pages we give a family after the funeral's over with of who contacted them and what they had to say. And then on a funeral, we usually have a day of visitation before the funeral the following day, and that's when the family comes in and they view first. If we need to make any changes, we make them. If not, then that night they'll have a family visitation. Like this family we're burying tomorrow, the visitation is 5 to 7 tonight, and then we'll bury tomorrow at 11, and that's kind of the process. And then after the service at the church tomorrow, then we'll go to the cemetery.
So the service is at a church, not
this time. Well, probably 90% of them are in our chapel, but again, some of the blacks, because that's been their custom for years, will want to go to the deceased or the family's church. And on this one tomorrow, we're going to the church.
Okay.
And we set up, like our service is at 11 tomorrow, so we'll set up at 10 at the church and have a viewing before the service, and then sometime after the service we have a viewing. So that's a family preference.
Okay, so whether or not they have a viewing is a family preference.
Yeah.
Is it popular?
Yeah, in the East Texas area, we're still referred to as the Bible Belt, and most of the time they'll have on their family visitation the night before, it'll be open to the public when they come by to visit with the family, sign a book and view, and then sometimes on a funeral, on most blacks, it's open like that hour ahead of time. If our funeral's at 11, from 10 to 11, it's open, and then we close it during the service, and then sometimes we'll reopen it after the minister finishes and pass everybody by.
Okay.
Getting more so all the time. For the past probably 7 or 8 years, we'd have 10 to 12 cremations out of about 125 funerals a year. This year, we're going to have about 25 or 30 cremations. So in East Texas, it's picking up more and more. But, families don't know anything about it until they get here. But you can still have a traditional viewing and a service with a cremation. And then after the service is over, we carry it to the crematory. Some of the families choose to have a full-blown funeral service, and then we carry it to the crematory, and some just have what's called a direct cremation. We pick it up wherever it died, the individual died, and we go straight to the crematory, and they don't have anything. Those are the ones that have trouble in a grieving process because they never went through a visitation, They never went through a mourning aspect of that funeral. So the ones that just have a direct cremation or that are not churchgoers, they're the ones that have the most trouble getting through a funeral process. Oh yeah, yeah. Like there's very few Jewish people in our area, but we carry what's referred to as a Orthodox Jewish casket, and their religion or beliefs, that casket is all wood. There's no metal in it anywhere. So sometimes they pick out different selections in a selection room than just a standard casket. Oh yeah, yeah. Okay. It's not. And then on the Muslim and Buddhist, they like to dress their dead. So we take our body that we've prepared out of the prep room and put it in a stateroom and let them come in and dress it. They don't know how a lot of times, because dressing a dead person is different from dressing someone alive, and you have to stay there and show them what they need to do, but they want to be part of that, so they dress them. Well, when we come in, like after making a death call or removal, we bring it to the prep room, and if we talk to the family at the hospital or wherever they passed away, we have to ask them about permission to embalm. If they give us permission to embalm, then that's when our embalming procedure starts as soon as we get back. If they say they don't want the individual embalmed, we still go ahead and set the features and bathe the body, and we'll put it on a dressing table and put it in one of our staterooms and let the immediate family view. But an unembalmed body we can't put out to the public. So if they're going to have a public visitation, then it has to be. There's health and safety stuff that you got to be careful about. And in the prep room, we're gowned up with covers for our shoes, gowns, masks, everything, just in case you've picked up somebody and they got killed in a wreck and you had no idea that they had some dreaded disease that's you can catch. Right. So our profession is it's not real safe. You got to be careful what you're doing back there. And we all have taken the series of hepatitis shots and all that. That's something else that you can pick up off a dead body, especially if it's been autopsied. You're in that person's insides, putting him all back together. If he had hepatitis and you prick yourself, you can come up with hepatitis. So you have to be careful in the back. If they're going to do a direct cremation, they may still have family from out of town that wants to see him before we carry him to the crematory. And a lot of times they just want to see that individual before we carry it to the crematory. Not really. Cremation, if you go through all the motions of a traditional funeral, cremation is a little bit less expensive because you're not tied up with buying cemetery space, or a lot of them may have the space, and the cremains come back in about probably a 7 or 8 pound container, and if they've got space already, you can bury it on their property. But if they don't have, that saves them from buying cemetery space, and some of the cemeteries require a grave liner. That's what the casket is put in the cemetery. If it's cremated, they don't have to buy that liner and all, so it's less expensive. A cremation is probably a third of what a traditional funeral is. Okay. Our embalming procedure on a standard death is $700 to embalm it, and then $125 we charge for what's called related care. Related care is bathing, cosmetizing, dressing, and putting in a casket. So that's the expense on the embalming. Now, on a pickup or removing a deceased from wherever they passed away, if it's in our service area, we charge $250 to go pick it up, and just to have something to compare it to. Here in Carthage, we remove a body from an institution or home or wherever for $250. An ambulance runs to that same residence for about $1,100. So our pickup is not that expensive. But if someone hadn't had deaths in recent years, a lot of them think that's expensive. But you got 2 men, and you got a multi-level cot that's involved in it. Plus, you got a funeral coach that's about $80,000. So there's expense to picking one up. Same thing on visitation. What they're paying for is the visitation itself, the employees, and all that's divided out over a year's time. What our insurance is, what our liability is, but insurance on our building, on our automobiles, what it costs to keep our staff, all that's added together and then divided by the number of people we service, and that's where we come up with what's called a service charge. And then there's 3 aspects to a funeral contract. The first part of it is the service charge, which is pick up and embalm, a day of visitation, a funeral the following day, the death call car, funeral coach, limousine, flower van, employees, and use of this facility. That's referred to as the service charge. And families in Texas have a right to pick and choose off of a standard service charge. Like if they didn't want a visitation, just a funeral, then we would take the visitation off. So any of that stuff they can pick and choose. If they have a traditional funeral here, the service charge is $4,321. The same service charge in Lufkin, which is an hour and a half from us, we buried down there last week, their service charge was $9,700. So it's a lot of difference in different regions. Independent funeral homes, which is owned like us, just a family, is most of the time a lot less expensive than the big chain funeral homes. They're more expensive. State or the government says that embalming doesn't preserve. We've held a man 10 days. Embalming does preserve. So I will argue with anybody about that. It won't last indefinitely, but it keeps a body from decomposing till you get through a funeral, and even after that, it's going to go back to dust, but it's going to go back to dust in a dignified way, meaning that embalming fluids will eventually, over a period of time, take all the moisture out of that body, and it's going to look like where these archaeologists and all dig up those tombs, and those bodies are just looks like leather. But they'll eventually, all of it will go back. But if you don't embalm, it's going to go back quick.
Right.
Just like an animal on the side of the road. So, and people don't think about that unless you bring it up. And I've explained that to people, and they've completely changed their mind about not embalming, and they have no idea about public health. Someone can have a dreaded disease that we're not aware of, and that's why we don't put it out to the public. Somebody gets killed in a wreck coming through here, he may have tuberculosis. And that virus still lives after a death for a while. And if you put an unembalmed body out and give some friend or somebody that comes by viewing, you're open for a lawsuit if they come up with TB or something. So that's why we don't put anything unembalmed out to anybody other than the immediate family, and they're in there a short time, and then we take it back to the back until it's cremated. An unusual death. If it's a death that's not under a doctor's care, meaning someone just died suddenly at the home. In big cities, they've got a coroner's office. In small cities like ours, they've got justice of the peace. They've got justice of the peace. Our justice of the peace on a family death, like this man we sent to Andrews this morning, he died at home suddenly of a heart attack, the justice of the peace goes out and he investigates the death, meaning he talks to the family, he looks at the situation, what happened, and if there's nothing that's out of place or out of the way, he'll sign the death certificate. If he's got a question about how that individual died, then we bring it back here, and then the justice of the peace of our county orders an autopsy, and we carry it to Dallas. To Southwestern is the one that Panola County uses, and they do an autopsy on it, and they call us, and we go back to Dallas and pick it up. And in the meantime, once they decide what that individual died of, then they notify the JP, and the justice of the peace is the one that signs our death certificate.
Okay.
So they if it's a suspicious death, we've got to send it to Dallas. If it's a car accident, most of the time we carry it to Dallas because the justice of the peace, someone dies in a car wreck, most of the time you can see what happened to them. They may have head injuries or something like that, but the justice of the peace, to protect the county, wants to know if that individual that had the wreck was on drugs, if he was drinking, or if he just died naturally, and that's what Southwestern Institute in Dallas will determine what he died of, and then they'll contact the JP back and say, on filling out your death certificate, this individual died of blunt force trauma to the head or whatever, but he gives the JP something that's substantial to put on that death certificate instead of just saying he had a heart attack.
Okay.
So it's according to how they died. Oh, I think there is an afterlife. I
Can you explain it?
Yes. I just I've gone to church ever since I was a child, and I just think that there is an afterlife, and there's going to be something after we're dead and gone. Our spirit's going to go to a place, and at some point in time, somebody's going to judge us of how we lived and carried on our life, and there's going to be repercussions, or there's going to be joyous reunion. Period.
Mm-hmm.
So I do, yes. Yeah, it does, and I've kind of made a joke of it because the Bible Belt cremations are just now catching on, and I always, if a family's kind of relaxed and not upset about the death, not meaning not upset, but you can talk to them, and they say we want a direct cremation. If they're good friends of mine, I'll tell them, y'all are all churchgoers, right? And they say, well, yeah, we go to church every Sunday and on Wednesday and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, the Lord promises you, if you're a bad person, you're going to burn in hell. Why on earth would you do it at your own hands? And, of course, some of them will laugh about that, and that doesn't turn them around. But that's my belief. I don't want any of my family cremated for that very reason. I'm not going to burn up on from myself doing it, no. But some families just overlook that. So, I just, and of course, I've been doing this for 44 years, and my son was raised up in this. But in that preparation room, like on a woman, once we raise the arteries and all on a woman, she's covered up, and we never leave anything in the back that's not covered up. So I just got a lot of respect for that, and I've had other funeral directors and embalmers that I didn't think conducted themselves right back there, but I said, let me tell you something. One of these days you're going to have to answer for everything you've done, and if you're back there making jokes or disrespecting a body in any way by not keeping them covered up, especially a woman, I don't know that a dead person don't know what you're doing. So I don't want that on my conscience. So in the prep room, nothing like that'll go on here. At the end of time, the Bible says that the graves will open and you'll come forward. So, and that's another sticking point that I've got. A lot of people on cremations get carried away, and they have a cremation, and instead of carrying it and putting it in a particular spot in a cemetery or something. They say, well, one family, he liked the ocean, so they strode part of his ashes in the ocean. The family kept part of them in jewelry, and he liked to hunt, so part of them they spread in the mountains in Colorado. Well, when the resurrection comes, I don't know. I guess he can gather all that stuff up, but I don't know why you would do that. I would, and that person's ancestors, they have no place to go. A lot of people on holidays will go and put family flowers out in the cemetery where their loved ones are buried. If you've taken ashes and just done away with them, there's no place for anybody to go, period. So that needs to be thought about, and it's not thought about until after they told us we want a direct cremation. That's irreversible. Once they do that and scatter ashes, they're lost. So that's, again, a personal preference. Just try to, most of the time, they're just wanting to talk. They want to tell you what happened at the house, and you just sit and listen to them, because we hear it every day and don't think a thing about it, but you just need to be quiet if they're talking and let them talk themselves through that. And every time they tell that story, they get a little better as far as getting over that death. You may not ever get over a death, especially if you lose a child or something like that, but if your religious beliefs kick in, you'll get to where you can bury it. Just like when your aunt died in the car wreck out there. That was 4 teenagers that died, and I know the Jovian family hated to lose Brenda, but their religious belief. Got a religious belief. That's not the end of it in a Christian or any religious belief's mind. Most of them believe there is a hereafter. So, no, not really. I read about them in trade journals and all, but we've never had one here. Now, we had a lady the other day and she was just curious, but I answered her question. It satisfied her. Her husband died at home suddenly, and of course she calls us, and the first thing we do is call the JP because that individual wasn't under a doctor's care. Well, while she's waiting on the JP, she's there with her dead husband, and not thinking about it, she kept saying, I heard a noise, and it was a buzzing noise, and I don't know what that was. Well, I knew exactly what she was talking about. I said, your husband got a pacemaker? And she said, yeah. I said, that's that pacemaker still trying to restart his heart, and that pacemaker will do that for as much as an hour. But that buzzing you hear was that pacemaker in his chest. Well, she didn't have a clue what it was, but that's what it was. Because a pacemaker, it's got a battery in it, and when somebody expires and quits breathing, your brain's dying, and everything goes to dying right then. But that pacemaker is still going to keep trying to restart your heart, and it's going to last a while. And that's what she was hearing. So it wasn't her imagination, but she had no clue about that. Probably, yeah.
Okay.
We had an employee here, and we've got an apartment in the back, and it was just he and his wife, and until he found a place, he stayed in the back about probably 3 months, and he told me one day, he said, I'm going to tell you something. I said, what? He said, you don't think I'm crazy, but he said, you know there's ghosts in this building? I said, well, I've never seen one, but it could be, I guess. Why? He said, they're ghosts here, but they're friendly. And I said, well, that's good that they're friendly, but I don't doubt that. They could be somebody's spirit still here, or I don't know. And that's another reason that I don't want to disrespect anybody. You don't know who's listening, who's looking. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, I believe in ghosts, yeah. But I'm not scared of ghosts.
Right.
If I saw one, I wouldn't panic.
That's actually all the questions that I think I have, just scanning over what I sent you.
Just to wind this up, the funeral business, more and more of the younger people don't see the necessity of what we've done here for 40 years and more of them. That's why we're having more cremations. But those people, after that's all over with, there'll be more and more psychiatrists that'll make more money because they have problems dealing with it. They didn't go through a grieving process, and you know, I just think that's all part of it.
Do you think a visitation is important in a grieving process?
Yeah. Again, it makes a family feel better when all their friends come by and say something to them, and it just helps. That's just one stage or one step in the process of getting through a death.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so. But maybe 20% of them don't have a visitation and just have the funeral, but that's still part of the grieving process, even the funeral service. But when you don't have anything, the ones that are going to come back in a month from now crying, wished I'd have done this, wished I'd have done that. And we always tell them when they say we want a direct cremation, how final that is, and it's over with. Again, in the trade magazines, I read about green burials all the time, but in the Bible Belt here, we hadn't had a green burial yet.
Okay.
And in some of the cemeteries, of course, they set their own rules and regulations, and we have to follow their guidelines. Like out at Wrestling, you can't bury out there unless you put that casket in what's called a grave liner. And what that does is it protects the casket. If you just put that casket in the naked ground, the thickness or the average thickness of a casket is just about the thickness of the hood of your car. And if you pile 2,000 pounds of dirt on it with no container, it's going to bend it and cause it to leak. So if a cemetery doesn't require a grave liner, we make them sign a release saying that it was explained to you that it might damage the casket, but you don't have to buy one. And if they sign off on it, we're protected on it. And somebody said, well, what difference does it make? They're dead. We're not going to. You don't ever know, like the coal mine up here, when they come in, they moved whole cemeteries to dig coal, and all those people were dug up and moved somewhere. And if they're not in a grave liner, those caskets are going to be mashed. And just to protect yourself from lawsuits, this day and time, we make them sign a release if they don't buy a grave liner.
That makes sense.
See, the grave liner keeps the dirt load off the casket, and if it's a vault, it'll keep that casket dry. Mr. Hawthorne, I owned Hawthorne's for 25 years, and he died in 1947. In about 1975, his widow remarried, and in about 75, they were just talking out loud about, well, I wish we could all be buried together, but the man she married, Mr. Osborne, his wife was deceased, and they were both buried down in the cemetery, and there's a space by each one of them. Well, we talked them into digging both of them up, and we moved them to a new part of the cemetery, and now they're all by the husbands and wives. So those people were in vaults. One of them had been down since the 40s, and that casket and all is still high and dry. So there's a purpose for a vault, and people say, well, the